We're getting into the heat of election season in the U.S., an intense, worrying, not normal election season. I used to cover politics, but I tired of how often stories weren't about the stakes around policy, but were instead about trying to get into the heads of campaign consultants and predicting what was going to happen. I still find people in public service fascinating, though, and how we project so much of our hopes and resentments on these leaders. One person I find really interesting is San Francisco Mayor London Breed. I live in the Bay Area, so I hear about her in the local news. But even if you don't, I'm sure you've heard about how San Francisco is faring these days. There's been a lot of talk of a doom loop in the city since COVID, with a central city emptied out by now remote workers, and some neighborhoods overwhelmed by homeless encampments or people using dangerous and deadly drugs out in the open. San Francisco had a record number of overdose deaths last year, the vast majority from fentanyl poisoning. That same year, a writer in New York Magazine wrote after a visit to San Francisco, the city often seemed to operate like an incompetent parent, confusing compassion and permissiveness, unable to maintain boundaries, producing the exact opposite result of what it claimed to want. So I wanted to talk to Mayor London Breed about the parenting and community values that made her. Mayor London Breed is not a parent herself. She's never had kids. She was raised by her grandmother, and by her 20s, she herself was an active caregiver as her grandmother developed dementia. She and I talk about that and about leading San Francisco during a time of transition. 2 years ago, city voters overwhelmingly recalled their top prosecutor, Progressive District Attorney Chesa Boudin, after a series of high-profile hate crimes against Asian Americans and voter exhaustion with car break-ins and smash-and-grab robberies. Then, this spring, voters backed a measure supported by Mayor Breed to withhold cash assistance from poor people without kids if they test positive for drugs and refuse to participate in any kind of treatment. Later this year, Mayor Breed faces her own voter referendum. She's running for re-election in November and has challengers from fellow Democrats to the left and the right of her. And some polls show she's in real trouble. In this episode, I talk with Mayor Breed about some of that and what's shaped her positions on drug policy in particular, including growing up in public housing when crack arrived to town and trying to help her younger sister through addiction and losing her to an overdose.
I don't remember the drug policy talk about all the just say no stuff. It was more of what was going on in my community where it was talked about certain people, and if you mess with something, you're going to be a dope fiend.
This is Death, Sex, and Money. The show from Slate about the things we think about a lot and need to talk about more. I'm Anna Sale.
Be warned that once you pick up a refreshingly cold drink from McDonald's and people see just how refreshingly cold that drink from McDonald's is, you may create drink envy. Because there are drinks, then there are drinks from McDonald's.
For a morning brew that really creates a stir, get any size iced coffee, including caramel and French vanilla, for just 99 cents before 11 a.m. Price and participation may vary, cannot be combined with any other offer or combo meal.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
I sat down with Mayor London Breed at San Francisco City Hall in an official meeting room. Think polished dark wood table, flags, gifts from foreign leaders displayed in glass cases around us. Mayor Breed is the city's second woman mayor and the first Black woman to hold the office. She grew up in San Francisco and turns 50 this year. Hi, Mayor Breed. This interview is to get to know you.
Okay.
And the San Francisco that made you as a young person and the sort of what it has been like to lead it in this moment.
Okay.
I want to acknowledge to start, you are not only the mayor of San Francisco right now, you are also in a campaign year. So you are running for re-election in 2024. so the listener can have that in mind, that you are also a candidate right now as they're listening. I want to be able to picture San Francisco when you think about the city that made you, that you grew up in. Do you have an early memory of a public gathering where you were surrounded with people and really felt like you were in community with people in San Francisco? What did that look like? What was happening?
Oh, shoot. That's a hard one. I think the San Francisco Juneteenth Festival always felt like that gathering around in community event. When I was growing up, it was more of an African American community, and it was pretty much African American. I mean, for example, the projects I grew up in, there was maybe one white family, and everyone else was pretty much Black. And if you didn't live there and you weren't Black, you were not coming near this public housing development. So it was a different kind of neighborhood. There definitely was a lot of crime, a lot of violence, and poverty. And the gatherings like Juneteenth were really what we looked forward to come together. And this is, of course, before social media and cell phones. I mean, it was really about coming together as a community whenever we had the opportunity to do so.
So you're describing like the 80s, I'm picturing, like early 80s, like you're like 10-ish?
Early 80s.
Okay. Tell me about what your grandmother was like. She raised you. If you were to describe, how did people that lived in the housing complex where you lived, how was she, what was her reputation?
So my grandmother, she pierced ears for people with a needle and thread. So people would knock on the door looking for their ears to get pierced. We always had food. I mean, our food was a lot of government food. My grandmother cooked a lot, and people from the community, they would, eat whatever little we had. So my grandmother was generous in that way. And she, she was pretty much a pillar in the community and was well respected. And she looked out for people and supported community, and spent her time raising her grandkids, us. And she had 4 daughters. One was my mother, but 2 of the daughters, at one point, we lived in a 2-bedroom. It was my grandmother, my brothers, my sister, and me, and then 2 of my aunts, one developmentally disabled. So it was all of us.
In a 2-bedroom?
Yes. And so when I turned 7, we were able to move into a 4-bedroom. But it was all of us, and we made it work. And she took care of all of us.
Where were you in the birth order with your siblings?
So my brother is older than I am, and then me, and then I have another brother underneath me, and then my sister. And then later on, my mother had 2 other daughters, but they didn't live with us in this particular apartment. And
And I haven't read very much about your mother, so you tell me to the extent you feel comfortable talking about her. But was she in your life when you were growing up?
She was around. It's a complicated thing, and I like to give her the opportunity to. I mean, she's not really comfortable talking about it.
I see. So she's
I think
still
there was.
living
Put it this way: I will say that, she had a complicated life and challenges, but more importantly, I remember a story that was written in the San Francisco magazine where they said she was on drugs, and she's never been on drugs. So I think there's just sometimes a lot of misinformation, but it's not my story to tell. And that's why I stay focused on the fact that my grandmother raised me in public housing, and I can only speak to what's happened to me, and her experience is, her experience.
Yep. If you were to describe your grandmother's parenting style, what was she like?
So my grandmother was very strict. She did not tolerate any disrespect. She did not tolerate misbehaving in any way. So if we got in trouble, we got whoopings. So it was no, like, you messed up, you got a whooping. And you messed up and didn't come in the house at a certain time, you did not have a key to her house.
Oh, then what happened?
You had to knock on the door. And then she would let you in, but you would get a whooping if you came in after it was too late. So it was a lot of discipline. And you had to wash the dishes. You had to make up the bed. There was a lot that we had to do. And it was, it just was what it was. It wasn't as if I felt it was bad or wrong or anything. That was just naturally what life was for me.
When you were a child, when you think about the other public aid that your family had access to, do you remember that as feeling tenuous? Would it come and go? Was it difficult to
What do you mean
navigate
public
it all?
aid?
Things like food stamps.
Oh, yeah.
Things
I
like,
could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
So, like, growing up, my grandmother got welfare to take care of us, her grandchildren. She had eventually her Social Security. And then my aunt, who, as I mentioned, was developmentally disabled, had SSI. Mm-hmm. And then we also had food stamps and WIC. Uh-huh. And there were a number of programs we would wait in line to get food because it was every week.
You personally, do you remember waiting in those lines?
Yes, we always had a buggy, a push cart. Uh-huh. And because my grandmother was starting to get old, I mean, she was older, so she couldn't do it by herself. And as I started to get older and go through puberty and become a teenager, that was something I remember as being like uncomfortable and embarrassing and something that I just wouldn't want any other kid to have to feel growing up. And it's a part of what shapes my push around policies even today as we start to open up grocery store style facilities rather than places where people have to wait in line and be given what they line up for.
Dignity.
Yes. Yes.
Did you have the feeling like she was strict because she wanted you to be raised right? Do you feel like it came from a place of fear and wanting to protect you? What was the feeling you had?
I would say that, she was my only parent. And that's how I saw her. She was, from my perspective, growing up, I've always felt like if something were to happen, my grandmother would protect me. So it wasn't protection, love, that wasn't a question. It just, I didn't understand why she was being so strict until I got older. And the world around me and what I would start to see as I was growing up, just some of the things that I was exposed to with the drugs, with the prostitution, with, everything. And she was very honest with me and very direct, even at an early age about, what is going on around me and where it's not appropriate to be touched. And I mean, you name it, she was very, very direct and would ask a lot of questions because she was very protective. And because of my family and everything that was going on and where I grew up, she had to be, because she also wanted to make sure that I didn't end up like folks around me, including members of my own family.
When did you become aware of what happened to people when they became addicted to substances in your life, would you say?
I would say, I mean, it just was, growing up, there were always people who were drug addicts. And
what were the drugs around?
The drugs were early on, it was heroin. So people would use heroin, and people would smoke weed, and people would drink, a lot of alcoholics. And there was a whole area where the alcoholics hung out. Hey, baby, how you doing? Come here, let me talk to you. Uh-huh. Like that kind of stuff. So that was always a part of it. And then when crack started to, be introduced, it was very early on. So then we went from certain mothers that are my friends' moms looking one way to all of a sudden looking differently. And it was, as a kid, you don't quite understand it, but something is wrong. Something doesn't look right here. Mm-hmm. And so I saw some of the strongest women, and we had a lot of women. I mean, there were men around too, but there were a lot of women. And I saw some of the strongest women go from being clean, looking good, to being something else. That was unfortunately very common. And then it got to a point where it started to happen to friends. And it was really strange to go from the person that you played with, second, third, fourth grade, to seeing them in a different light. So there was just a lot of transition for people that I grew up with. It just happened right before my eyes. You had the drug dealers, which were people I grew up with too, including, family members who were out there selling crack, cocaine, and marijuana. Nobody cared about marijuana even then, but the crack was very much problematic. And folks went from that to went from being what you would consider like normal and okay to being strung out. So it was around us a lot. It was constant. And you knew the difference between the smell of crack and the smell of weed.
Yeah. And this is like, again, like kind of early 80s. Yeah. So you're born in 1974. So you're becoming like hitting double digits when this is happening. When you think about what you were taught about drug policy as a kid, and like was like just say no something that happened in your classrooms? Were you taught one thing by kind of public health campaigns that maybe didn't really fit with what you were seeing, or do you have a memory of that?
Everything that I experienced or learned came from, remember this person, they used to be this and now they're on crack.
Yeah.
So it became, don't even mess around with it. Don't even touch it, because even if you try it, you could be strung out. Like I think because of what I saw changed in other people, that freaked me out enough.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to be a drug addict. And I know it's easier said than done, because there are different reasons why people end up in a situation like that, but I didn't even play around with it. Like there was nothing, like, look, as a kid, it's like you play around with smoking cigarettes. Yeah, I did that. We were in the park smoking cigarettes, and even that I was like, ooh, why does anybody do this? Or we're in the park and we take a drip, like we get somebody to buy us a beer from the store, stuff like that, as a kid. But nowadays that stuff will kill you, and it's a lot different. But one of the things I never messed around with, even with marijuana, because of the concern of marijuana being laced with something, because there were times when people would, lace marijuana with crack cocaine. So I didn't even want to play with it. Like I didn't even want to mess around with it. And so what I chose to do is to keep my distance from it. And so if someone saw me doing something wrong, people chastise me more, because they're like, oh no, you can't be out here, or you can't. Like the community really protected me. They wouldn't let me do something that was going to bring harm to myself.
I see.
So
do you think that was because you were your grandmother's oldest daughter and you were, what do you think why?
I think it had a lot to do with a number of things. Number one, my brother, he was kind of out there in the game, like selling dope, and, he was well known in that world and well respected, and people saw him on a high level in the streets. So it was a level of respect for him that they weren't going to let his little sister get caught up. That's number one. I also think that people knew that I was good in school. Like I got good grades, and people considered me smart, and they wanted me to do well. I was supported. It was like, no, you stay in those books. You stay focused on doing the right thing. Like I got encouraged even by people who were drug addicts. It was encouraging from them. No, don't end up like me. Like the community really looked out for me, and I think kind of either stayed away from me or encouraged me so that I didn't go off the rails. So that was my experience. It wasn't really, I don't remember any lessons from school. I remember regular lessons from school, like if it's yellow, let it mellow, and the environment and stuff like that. But
that sounds like San Francisco public schools.
Yeah. And I was like, Mama, don't flush the toilet. We got to save water. So my grandmother was like, get out of here, girl. She didn't want to hear it. But the fact is, we had things that we learned in school that I remember. But as far as drugs, my lessons came from my neighborhood.
Yeah.
And also me avoiding getting caught up in that world also came from my neighborhood.
Did you see people in recovery?
Oh, yeah. I saw a lot of people in recovery.
I mean, so did you understand that you could be a dope fiend and you could be not a dope fiend after?
It was hard because it was rare. So we had organizations like Walden House, and Walden House is now a part of Health Right 360. But Walden House was where people were able to go. Glide was another place,
Church.
Like it was, if something happened, you go to Glide, it was, they'll help you. We didn't know what that was, but it's like, if worst case scenario, because again, we didn't have cell phones, we had pay phones, we didn't have all this stuff. We had to know where to go and who to seek out. But recovery was not a very common thing. It wasn't. We've very rarely did someone get clean, but it happened.
Coming up, that public housing complex where Mayor Breed grew up, it was razed when she was in college, and that shaped her approach to new development as mayor.
What I wasn't going to do is tear down 300 units and only build 200. Like what I didn't want to do is make the mistakes of the past.
If you are a regular listener, you've heard me mention a few times that I write a weekly newsletter. Well, last week it included a call for help because I've been having trouble with my sleep lately. And many people chimed in the comments with very useful and doable tips to improve my sleep hygiene. And many people assured me, or warned me, that this is something that happens in women's bodies as hormones change in your 40s and 50s. I've been thinking a lot about perimenopause and menopause since I interviewed artist and writer Miranda July about her new novel, All Fours. I call it a perimenopausal thriller. It's truly a wild romp, a great read. And we're going to share that conversation with Miranda July with you soon. But as we put that episode together, I thought I'd also like to hear what you're noticing in your life about the impacts of perimenopause or menopause, whether it's happening in your body or in the body of someone you love. So tell me what you've noticed about this time of change that affects so many of us and somehow still feels so mysterious. And tell me in particular about the surprises. I'm 43, turning 44 at the end of the summer, so truly, I need to know this information. So send us your stories about the surprises that came with perimenopause or menopause, whether it was physical changes or emotional ones. What big transitions did you notice that you think hormones were a part of? Record a voice memo on your phone and email it to us at deathsexmoney@slate.com. And you could just send us an email too, but I really want to hear your voices on this one, so try sending out a voice memo. And again, if you want to be a part of crowdsourcing sleep tips and also hear about what I'm thinking about and reading and listening to from week to week, do sign up for my weekly newsletter at annasale.substack.com. You can also find a link to that in our show notes. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. One of the things I've gotten from therapy is just saying out loud how I tell the stories of why something is going on in my life or how I am the way I am. Just getting those narrative threads out of my head and into a conversation with a trained professional, it helps me see that sometimes my narratives are a little flimsy or self-defeating or based on old information that I can update. Therapy has helped me see these stories more clearly, and it's empowered me to revise and update some things, to focus on what I value, who I am now, and not what I used to think or what I think others might expect of me. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online and designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional cost. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/deathsexmoney today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/deathsexmoney. This summer, I'm spending a lot of time outside, hiking, swimming in rivers. I've got a big camping trip coming up in a bit. And wherever I go, I'm bringing my microbiome with me. That's the 38 trillion bacteria that live in and on you, especially your gut, that are essential to whole body health. Seed's DS-01 Daily Synbiotic is a 24-strain probiotic and prebiotic that benefits your gut, skin, and heart health in just 2 capsules a day. Using Seed's DS-01 Daily Synbiotic is easy because unlike similar products, this is shelf-stable. It's easy to throw in a bag and bring with me because it doesn't require refrigeration. Just a big glass of water and 2 capsules in the morning, and I'm done. And with clinical trials and breakthrough research published in top scientific journals, Seed's probiotic research and development make DS-01 a product you know you can trust. And your gut, it's a central hub for various pathways through the body, and a healthy gut microbiome means benefits for digestion, skin health, heart health, your immune system, and more. Support your gut this summer with Seed's DS-01 Daily Synbiotic. Go to seed.com/DSM and use code 25DSM to get 25% off your first month. That's 25% off your first month of Seed's DS-01 Daily Synbiotic at seed.com/DSM, code 25DSM.
Hi, I'm Jesse Tyler Ferguson, host of the podcast Dinners on Me. I take some of my favorite people out to dinner, including, yes, my Modern Family co-stars, like Ed O'Neill.
I had friends in organized crime.
Sofia Vergara.
Why do you want to be corruptible?
Julie Bowen.
I used to be the crier.
And Aubrey Anderson Emmons.
I was so down bad for them at Miranda when I was like 8.
You can listen to Dinners on Me wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Death, Sex, and Money from Slate. I'm Anna Sale. Mayor London Breed left San Francisco to go to college at UC Davis, just over an hour north. She started out as a chemistry major, but changed to political science. And while she was studying, she was feeling the impacts of government policy on her life, like how to get her grandmother the right kind of care as her health failed, and also the effects of the city's decision to tear down the public housing complex where she grew up. The community, almost all Black people, scattered.
And in fact, they made the decision to not only tear down 300 units, the decision was made to only build 200. So it was clear that some people weren't coming back.
So you come back to the city, to San Francisco from college. It's the mid-90s. So the first .com boom is sort of gathering. The place where you grew up had been razed. Did you feel like you knew, where did you live when you came back to San Francisco? Did you know which neighborhood you wanted to live in?
Well, I lived with my grandmother.
You moved in with your grandmother.
I had to come home, not just after college. I had to come home almost every weekend and definitely every holiday because I had to take care of her. I had to do the grocery shopping. I had to get her medications. There were just a lot more things that had to be done for her that needed to happen every month to ensure that she was going to be okay. And I gradually became more of a caretaker to support her as things got harder for her physically, but also things started to change for her mentally. And that's when I really started to notice and understand what the real problems were with her dementia, because I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
I didn't know what dementia was. I knew what Alzheimer's was, but I had to do a lot of research to understand what dementia was and what it represented. But, I took care of her and my aunt for many years where I just had to take care of their money, make sure the rent was paid, make sure all the bills were paid, make sure there was weekly groceries. And she also had a in-home support service worker. So I had to use all city resources and work a full-time job running the African American Art and Culture Complex. So when it got to a point where it was very much me taking care of her and it was less support, I realized I can't do this on my own. It became really hard.
It sounds like you were primarily the sort of administrative director for your family, including, or mostly your aunt and your grandmother.
Well, I was the consistent support for my grandmother and my aunt because many family members would come and they would go. And I had one of my aunts who was very helpful with their doctor's appointments, but ultimately there was not the consistency of support that I needed in order to make sure they were cared for.
Sounds like there were some hard conversations.
Oh, yeah.
In there.
There were hard conversations. It's easier, like when you showing up to say hi to somebody or showing up for one day, that's easy. Showing up every day, that's hard because every day she has to use the bathroom several times, including she has to be clean. She has to be fed. She has to be, have a good quality of life. Go outside, get some fresh air, sit in the living room, watch some television. Maybe someone calls her. Like they're just, there was a lot of work and a lot of really, really hard times where it was very lonely and very frustrating and really hard to be a caregiver, but also watch this woman who was extremely strong, didn't play around, didn't mess around, become someone that was hard to recognize. So it was a bit of a vulnerability for, I know her too, that she had changed. And when you develop dementia, you don't know what's going on. So it was really tough. And then when you're in your 20s, like for me, I didn't understand what it was. And luckily, her nurse practitioner at UCSF was extremely helpful. And the internet wasn't what it is now, but there's a lot of research that she helped me do to understand it, including a support group.
You found a support group for you?
Yes. And the support group were, like, I'm in my 20s. Everybody in the support group were probably in their 50s, maybe 60s even.
Were you the only Black person in your support group?
Yes.
What was that group like?
They were all so supportive and helpful to me. They wanted to be extremely helpful and, because they were going through it, but then they also felt bad that I'm like so young and going through it. So it was just, they would bring food, tell me to take it to my grandmother. And I mean, really sweet people who just were trying to... Dementia for a parent, because again, I consider my grandmother my parent, it takes such an emotional toll where you don't even understand what you're going through and the frustrations, because I've had a number of just moments where I didn't understand, and I'm just like, I'm losing it, and there was no help. And so having support and having people that you can call on, that was definitely very helpful. And also learning about it, because I was learning about what it is and its impact so that I can be a better help to my grandmother.
Mm-hmm. Did you live with her through the end of her life?
No, she lived in Laguna Honda Hospital through the end of her life when I finally was able to get her in there. She was in Laguna Honda for about 12, 13 years or something like that.
Who paid for her hospital care and her long-term care?
So my grandmother received Social Security, and she qualified for Medi-Cal. And so I did all the paperwork. Like, all of this stuff required a lot of paperwork. So I ended up, I didn't want to put her in a facility, and we didn't have any money for a facility. So I ended up putting her on the list to get into Laguna Honda. And when I got her in, what happened is they took over all of her money. So she basically, all of the money she got from Social Security and whatever the supplemental, all of that covered her, and it was paid for by Medi-Cal.
So I'm understanding. The reason I'm asking all these questions is because to me, it sounds like that is a public policy education in how to get things to happen in California, that you had to deal with the paperwork which can be onerous in this like just figuring out how to pull down the resources that people can access when they need.
I gotta say, I think the paperwork is more onerous now than it was even back then. I felt like the paperwork was a lot simpler and, because I was doing it annually. But the good news is every step of the way, like even her nurse practitioner, before my grandmother got to a place where it was clear what was going on, we went through this process. I didn't know to go seek this stuff out. I was told this is what you should think about doing, and I was provided with help to understand how to do it.
So while you're helping your grandmother get to care, is it okay if I ask you about your sister?
Sure.
Did she struggle with addiction for a long time?
She did. She struggled, and she also was a diabetic. So she had other challenges, which makes when you're diabetic and you have a problem with addiction, it's that much harder because she was on insulin.
Yeah.
And so it was really tough for her for a long time, and to, see her go from someone who's like my size, which is plus, to someone who is extremely thin was really challenging to watch. And there was some real issues and some real changes.
Do you know what drug, what did she OD on? Do you know?
Well, I'd probably just prefer not to get into that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you think at the time when you...
I would just say that, the drugs impacted, her organs and her ability to...
She wasn't well.
She wasn't well, yeah.
Yeah. How old was she when she died?
The day before she turned 26.
Young woman. Were you seeing her regularly around that time?
Not as much, no. I helped her get into Walden House. And this is, again, the same time my grandmother's going through dementia. She said she needed some help, and that was a big sign. And I had a friend at Walden House who was running the program, and he instantly, got her in. And she was doing okay for a little while. So it just, the struggles, the ups, the downs. And it was tough, but I didn't see her that much because, when people are in a situation like that, you don't really see them as much because I think a lot of times people are embarrassed and they don't want to come around, and they don't want you to see them like that. And that is, growing up, that was always a stigma attached to addiction, and a lot of embarrassment and a lot of fear, and people would oftentimes hide.
So I want to sort of understand how you came to understand what role you had in trying to help her, what you could do to be helpful and the limits of that. So you helped her get into a program from a community-based organization. Were there times when you sort of had to set conditions for the kinds of relationship you could have together?
Oh, yeah, I did, because there were things that she did that were very much problematic. And look, I don't want to speak ill of my sister. We know that people who struggle with addiction do things that they shouldn't do, and it sometimes can harm family members. And, I was definitely very aggressive with her. And when I say aggressive, like, when we would get calls and I'd go down to the Tenderloin looking for her, it's like I was, I would park, get out the car, and go searching, and all in buildings in the TL and everywhere to try to basically drag her out of wherever she was in order to get her into help. So yes, I was very aggressive. And I think, I take a different stance. I know a lot of folks believe that treatment should not be forced, that it doesn't work. And I understand that. It's not a one size fits all. Some people do well with harm reduction. Some people do well with abstinence-based. Some people do well with a little bit more compassion, and others do well with a little bit more force. And I just have a very strong no tolerance, for letting things just happen and say that it's okay to be. And as a result, people who struggle with addiction, I think just to do nothing is not a solution. I think we should always try to do something, even if it makes people uncomfortable, because my desire is to want to see them live and to not die. And that takes doing something a little bit different than what we've done in the past.
Every week on Talk Easy with Sam Fragoso, I invite an artist, writer, or politician to come to the table and speak from the heart in ways you probably haven't heard from them before. Some of my favorites are with Tom Hanks, Questlove, and Cate Blanchett. In recent weeks, I talked to actor Dan Levy, director Ava DuVernay, and the editor of The New Yorker, David Remnick. You can listen to Talk Easy on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Whatever you think about the presidential campaign circus, one thing is guaranteed. The U.S. Supreme Court is going to be absolutely central to what happens in the coming election, and they've just released a raft of decisions that reach into just about every aspect of your life, from pollution to air travel, abortion rights, gun violence, and of course, presidential immunity. I'm Dahlia Lithwick, and we just wrapped up our Opinion Palooza series on Amicus, Slate's podcast about the courts and the law, where we break down the weedy details of Supreme Court news to make it accessible to real, smart, non-lawyer people like you. It has been a truly mind-boggling 7 weeks of news from the High Court, and we want to make sure that you understand it all. All of the episodes in this series are now available, and if you become a Slate Plus subscriber, you'll get access to a whole bunch of bonus episodes too, like The Court of King Alito, where we examine how this justice's fondness for flag-waving intersects with how he does his day job. Listen to Opinion Palooza on Amicus Now. That's AMICUS, wherever you're listening now.
Mayor London Breed knows people in her city are not happy with the status quo. In a poll of likely city voters last month, commissioned by one of her opponents, 56% said the city was on the wrong path. But what's not clear is what direction voters want the city to go in next. Earlier this spring, voters approved Mayor Breed's proposal to make public aid from San Francisco contingent on participating in treatment if you test positive for drugs. But plenty of people protest that move as counterproductive and unnecessarily punitive.
Wait, are you asking me if, making people's lives harder would help them get off drugs?
Yeah, while they're using.
No.
On the next episode, I talk with James T. Morrison, someone who spent most of his young adulthood using drugs on the streets of California, cycling in and out of jail without stable housing, and nearly dying from an overdose. In San Francisco, there are publicly funded treatment programs that don't require sobriety for participation. And Mayor Breed has supported more investment in abstinence-based treatments, too, where participation requires staying sober. So on some things, she's carving out more strict rules, more sticks along with carrots to deal with drug policy, for example. But on other things, like building housing and development, Mayor Breed says what's getting in the way is too many government rules.
sometimes when you say, we want to convert buildings to housing, but there's an open space requirement, and we had to get rid of that to do this, and it's taken 6 extra months, and you start getting into the technicalities of all this stuff. Who wants to hear that? Nobody wants to hear that. Just do your job. And it's not creating new laws. It's getting rid of old ones. It's deconstructing decades of bureaucracy to get to yes. And that is what I'm trying to do as we speak, and have been this entire time that I've been mayor. In every policy decision that I make is most of the time is just getting rid of old stuff. I mean, I wish I could take, with OpenAI and ChatGPT, I wish I could take the charter and all these laws and throw them into a big little chat box thing and type up a few things and have them spit out the basics. I wish I could run this city like I did during the pandemic when I had emergency powers to be able to make decisive decisions that I know people in San Francisco want to see us do.
2 more questions. Okay, let me think about what I want to ask. I think the question I want to ask is, mid-2018, when you were the first elected Black woman mayor of San Francisco, when you thought about how you wanted to lead this city, did you have a role model in mind? Did you feel like you had any models? Who did you look to?
So I didn't think about it in that way. And there are people, of course, like, Kamala Harris and Willie Brown and other African-American elected leaders who have served this city well and continue to serve in clearly a significant capacity. But there were people in my life. There's a school named after Gloria Davis in the Bayview. She was a mentor and someone who pushed me and supported me and encouraged me and helped me. There was Madame Swartzak, my French teacher, who made sure that I was able to go on a Black college tour to see college and to see other African Americans thriving at a university. There were...
So you went all over? You went to Howard, Spelman. Where did you go on the tour?
Atlanta, Georgia.
Atlanta, okay.
Yeah, yeah. So one of her friends helped pay for me to, we didn't have money to do anything like that, but there was a Black college tour and she helped get the money. She wanted me to have that experience. There were people that looked out for me and provided those opportunities. And so when I think about how I lead, it's not just my experience of what I've been through, but it's like, what got me through? And how do I take all of those things of what got me through and implement the kinds of policies and investments that are going to do the same for the next generation of San Franciscans that might be growing up in similar circumstances. From day one, I always knew that I was going to make decisions based on my experience, but also based on the hope that so many folks who were part of my upbringing instilled in me to ensure my success in life, not necessarily in politics, but just in life.
Well, my last question is about politics, because as you've been mayor of San Francisco, not only is there a housing crisis that was generations in the making, there was also the pandemic. There's record overdose deaths last year, a change in how the city looks as far as where industry goes when business is happening, and trying to figure out what the future is for downtown San Francisco. So you have to lead during these really tough issues where there's not one silver bullet. And so my question is about communication, because you both have to demonstrate that you get the complexity of these issues. You have to assure voters that you've got a plan. And to make any decision is to possibly alienate some people who wish you made a different choice. And how do you think about how you hope as a leader that you communicate about these really, life and death issues?
And I appreciate that question. It's a very complex one that has a number of answers to it. So I'll do my best. The pandemic was different from everything. It was a once in 100 years pandemic where we thought, or at least I did, that based on science and technology and how far we've come in medicine, that we would never end up in a situation like that. So there was no playbook, but there were history books that helped to guide us with the decisions that we had to make in order to ensure that we saved lives. And we did. And San Francisco was a leader in saving lives during the pandemic. And none of us could have predicted an explosion of crime, not just in San Francisco, but all over the country, in major cities in the Bay Area. And we had to pivot, and we had to increase our capacity. We had to make some hard decisions and some aggressive changes that are different than what San Francisco traditionally would have done. I mean, really,
and so when you were like, we need to pivot, and I'm going to tell the voters this is why, like, how did you think about this is how I'm communicating that we're pivoting away from?
Yeah, and that's different things. Downtown is a different conversation than overdose deaths and drug abuse, right?
Well, how about specifically around how to deal with overdose deaths?
And so here's the difference between me and anyone else who, thinks that they could have done anything different. I grew up in the worst of circumstances, unlike any other mayor that served, in terms of San Francisco, crack epidemic, public housing, poverty. And so when I made decisions around the arrest and of both drug dealers and drug users, and including Proposition F, where if you want money from the city, you have to be in treatment, where do you think that came from? It came from former drug dealers and former drug users. The recovery community in particular were the ones who advocated and campaigned for Proposition F. And the sad part about all of what we did with this community of people who actually have experience and know what it feels like to be on the streets and dealing and using drugs is, even though this was communicated, even though they stood with me strong in every press conference, it was as if they didn't exist. And so here's the challenge we have is, I'm not just making decisions and it's coming from me as London Breed and my experience. It's how do you give a voice to people who traditionally are talked about, are told what is going to happen for them or what's good for them, but are not always at the table. And now they're at the table and they're helping to shape policies, but they're also helping to implement those policies on the ground with communities that they have a lot better understanding than even I do, because I've never been an addict. And that's part of the challenge that we have sometimes with elected leaders is, there are a lot of people who run for office and they come across as folks who say, well, this is what I'm going to do because you know what? This is what's good for you. But they have no idea what it feels like to live like you. But they're telling you what they're going to do for you or to you. And that's the big difference here. And so when we implement our policies around what's happening with this drug crisis, we are seeing a difference, especially in the Tenderloin in the daytime. We are seeing a difference in the overdose deaths. And so that's the difference here. I'm not doing it because I say do it. I'm doing it because the community that I'm working with that is out there making a difference and helping to save and change lives, because they are at the forefront of this work. And they have been doing it and working with communities and helping people get treatment and helping people stay in recovery, including many people I grew up with.
Thank you, Mayor Breed.
Thank you.
That's San Francisco Mayor London Breed, who is facing 4 challengers as she campaigns for re-election in November. This episode was produced by me. Death, Sex, and Money is produced by Slate. Please support the production of our show by becoming a member of Slate Plus. You'll not only support our work on Death, Sex, and Money, you'll get access to benefits like listening to us and all of the great shows that Slate makes, like Slow Burn and Decoder Ring, without any sponsor breaks. To subscribe, just click Try Free at the top of the Death, Sex, and Money show page on Apple Podcasts, or go to slate.com/DSM Plus to get access wherever you listen. The Death, Sex, and Money team is Andrew Dunn, Zoe Azoulay, and Cameron Drews. Daisy Rosario is our senior supervising producer at Slate. Alicia Montgomery is Slate's head of audio. Our theme music is by the Reverend John DeLure and Steve Lewis. And if you are new to our show, welcome. We're so glad you're here. You can find us and follow us on Instagram at DeathSexMoney. And you can subscribe to my weekly newsletter at annasale.substack.com. And you can reach us anytime with voice memos, pep talks, questions, critiques at our email address, deathsexmoney@slate.com. We love hearing from you. I'm Anna Sale, and this is Death, Sex, and Money from Slate.
Owning a business isn't just an occupation. It's a legacy for those you want to pass it on to. At Sandy Spring Trust, succession planning is one of the many aspects of wealth services we provide. We'll work with you one-on-one to answer questions and advise you on valuations, transfer of ownership, and much more. What's your next financial destination? Visit sandyspringbank.com/wealth. Wealth and insurance products are not FDIC insured, not guaranteed, and may lose value. Wealth products offered by Sandy Spring Trust, a division of Sandy Spring Bank.